Hello, hello, and welcome to Boom Show episode number 6. Welcome, dear Boomsters. This is a very special Boom Show, and the reason for that is that it is a startup special. And what we're going to do is have you and somebody here in the studio asking questions about the legal aspects of building and growing a startup, especially with a focus here on Switzerland. That's what we do here and today. This is why it's called the Startup Special. With me in the studio, we have Bassil Eid. Can we see him already? Yes, here he is. Bassil, we cannot, but we can do fist bumps. That's something at least. I talked with Bassil because he was watching one of the shows here and he gave me feedback, and we jumped on a call. And he said, and we discussed a few things, differences between the Silicon Valley, which you will find out he knows about, and Switzerland. And he said at some point, oh, I would like to ask your lawyer a few questions, which gave us the idea to this whole show. Because this is exactly what we're doing right now. In the middle of us, sitting in Spain, actually, not being here in the studio with us, but being with us on the show, you see Christian Meisser. Thank you very much, Christian, for joining us today.
Hi, guys. Pleasure to be with you.
Do you feel the same, Bassil?
Oh, I'm overjoyed.
So this is your show, basically, and I'm really happy that you're in the studio, because at some point you wanted to come through Skype as well and be somewhere else. But I would be sitting here alone, all by myself.
Yeah, I couldn't let you do that.
Yeah.
I had to make it.
So thank you for making that little journey that you do today 4 times, not only 2 times, just in order to be with us or be with me here in the studio today. So we will get back to you, Christian. I would like to say a few other things about this show as well. The one special thing that I always like to tell the audience is that behind the cameras we have Gustavo Salami of the company Kuble, and the last time I announced him, he was just waving at me, thank you, Gustavo. The last time I announced him, I said he's the CEO of Kuble, but in the meantime he has stepped down because he wanted to, because this channel here, poker.tv, that intrigues him so much. That has taken all of his time since the lockdown, I would say. And this project has become so much himself, part of his personality, that he stepped down as a CEO and became the chief of innovation of this company and is now fully focused on this show. This show, not the show, the channel actually. And this channel is something really special, at least in Switzerland where I live. It's a corporate media project and it is a live stream. As you know, all of you who are on the live stream know that this is a live stream. Other people will see the recordings and they might not know if I don't tell them, so I tell everybody of you. This project here is special because it's a live stream. It has a start, it has an ending, and there are no retakes. Whatever you say on the show is being said, and that's it, and that's the cool thing. And if you, as a company, as a corporate, would like to talk about your content and creating it effectively, I think you should be talking with Gustavo. Usually in the Boom Show, which is one show of many shows on this channel, I deconstruct business growth cases with CEOs. Today, as I said before, it's a little special, a little different. It's the Startup Special, and this takes us back to you, Bassil. Why are you in Switzerland?
Good question. So I moved here from the Bay Area in October last year. Primary reason I'm in Switzerland, in all honesty, is my wife basically just wanted to come back to the European lifestyle, and we wanted to kind of settle down and raise a family. But coming back here, I've really seen, I was here in 2016, and coming back here, I've really seen like a nice, I think, acceleration of the startup community. Both from the number of startups, but also from the investor community, and also from corporate ventures. Like corporates in general have a much more openness and greater appetite to work.
That's very nice, very kind of you. I just cut you off there because all these niceties, but they count for nothing. No, I appreciate it, but it must feel as if you were a quarterback in the NFL and then coming to Zurich.
Yeah, it's definitely a change of pace. There's no doubt about it. Being in Silicon Valley, constantly hit with, let's say, opportunities, things to do, ideas, emerging tech, and then coming here, it's a bit of a more of a slower pace, and you get to bring a lot of that experience and things you learn from Silicon Valley here, and you could potentially apply them, and there's opportunities for you. But yeah, it's a change of pace, Dave. There's no doubt about it. But it's nice to kind of maybe take the gas pedal off a little bit and kind of refocus and think about which areas I want to focus on.
And your wife has done a good job.
Yeah, definitely.
Convincing you to come here.
That's right, yeah.
At least we have a little Silicon Valley here in Switzerland, thanks to you. That's good for us, and you're also, you definitely want to make it here, so that doesn't seem to be an excuse to you, not being in the Silicon Valley anymore, right? So you just created your new company. Which one is that?
Yeah, so I have an advisory company here, but on top of that too, we're actually launching, me and a few friends, we're actually launching a kind of a payroll startup at the moment, specifically focused on startups and small businesses. And so, you know, that's one of the kind of the real desires, I think, when we were first starting out here. It was difficult to understand, I think, from a legality standpoint, how to kind of start a business, incorporate it, to what are some of the legal frameworks behind it. And so, like, you know, when I kind of when I kind of hinted that to you I'd say a few weeks ago, and you offered me a chance to talk to an attorney, I mean, I just jumped on that. There's no doubt about it.
I thought I might have a chance to offer that to you. The next step that I had to take was asking Christian, and Christian said yes. And I'm very happy that you're here with us. As said before, Christian, tell us a little bit about your background, because the fun part here is that you're not only a great lawyer, it's that you're also a CEO, and this show is directed at CEOs, and you're also a startup. Tell us a little bit more about LEXR, LEXR.
Thanks, Dave. Pleasure to be on the show. So I have a traditional legal career behind me. I worked at the district court in Zurich. I worked at large law firms, both in Zurich as well as London, as well as Montreal. And at some stage, I figured, well, is the way legal services are delivered in these large law firms really going to be the same way in 20 years from now? Or is there a fundamental change coming our way? My conclusion was that there will be fundamental change, and probably it's not going to be driven by the current large law firms, or only partially.
What's that change going to be?
Well, multiple levels. I think using technology is a big part of it, but also integrating more closely with businesses to deliver, be closer to the data of the business to then deliver better and faster legal services at a better price point. So I think there's going to be a mixture of many things that are going to change the legal market.
What are you especially excited about?
With LEXR, one dream of mine was to use technology to, on the one side, be able to work remotely. There's no reason for a lawyer to sit in a mahogany table at Bahnhofstrasse. You may as well sit in Spain and deliver legal services. At the same time, deliver legal services for the entrepreneurs the way they actually need it. So a lot of lawyers have a tendency to be very risk averse. By nature, choosing law as a study is already a risk averse choice. And then during the studies, you get all these risk concepts ingrained into your nature. And when I really realized that was when I was doing the MBA, I was talking to my lawyer friends about launching LEXR, and everyone said, "Oh wow, Christian, awesome idea," and they told me 10 reasons why it will never work. And when I talked to my MBA friends, it was the same response. "Wow, Christian, awesome idea," and they told me 10 other things I could do on top of that. And then I realized that I also had that lawyer's mindset of looking at the risks only and not as much on the opportunity, which in part is the job of a lawyer, to point out risks. At the same time, you can go a bit too far, and then delivering legal services that are more attuned to the risk level of an entrepreneur is what we're doing with LEXR at the moment.
I was using an NFL analogy with Bassil just a minute ago, and I said if you were the quarterback of an NFL team, you wouldn't want to come to Zurich. That wouldn't be a good choice. In your case, I remember that you had a post up these days where you said in soccer, law would kind of be the goalkeeper, so kind of a defensive role.
Absolutely. I mean, the analogy is that it's the Cristiano Ronaldo that wins the game for you. It's the business case. It's the sales guys and the software engineers that really deliver value to the customers and get the sales done. And the legal role is more of a defensive role, that if anything goes wrong, you have the goalkeeper in the back that ideally then catches the ball and doesn't let it go into the net. And there's a lot of analogy there. as a lawyer, you have to accept that role. Sometimes you'd want to be a striker, but the real life as a lawyer is not like in Suits, where you go out there and do all the deals for your clients. It's mostly about delivering consistent, high-quality legal work so that the client can sleep well at night and know his business is safe.
Yeah, when I asked the first lawyer to help me with all my contracts, and she said this is going to be 10,000 plus something, I just thought, no, I'm good enough at doing this myself. And then later I found out that I actually needed that kind of defense that you were just talking about. And that was the time when you and I talked about things. And this is also when I actually spent some money on professional services. I think that analogy makes a lot of sense. How do you see that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Cristiano Ronaldo will definitely win games, but at the end of the day, it's the defense and goalies that pretty much win championships. So you guys are definitely needed. One point that you touched on, Christian, was about like automation. Super interesting point. If you do see a lot of these services, let's say, becoming more automated from a legal standpoint, and will that also help reduce the cost? So for example, in the United States, basically, for incorporation services, I was using a service called InkFile, and there was a bunch of other kind of like microservices that, like smaller startups that were popping up that were automating specific processes of the legal process. And so do you see kind of the cost also coming down as you guys automate, I'd say, more and more of the kind of the services that you offer?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we divide legal services in three types of legal services. One is really the day-to-day operations. This is sales contracts, hiring, firing, corporate housekeeping, where we focus on managing it well with solid processes and automating where possible. And then you have kind of the project-based legal. This may be a financing round, implementing an employee stock option plan, which in the life cycle of a company only occurs once or twice. But across the economy, many times it happens. And there we focus on packaged products where we say, well, we take established standards and automate it as much as possible so we can deliver these standardized sort of life cycle events at the flat fee for companies.
Yeah, Christian, I would like to give a little example because I just bought from you. I needed the privacy policy for my GDPR bundle, and you offered that as a package to me.
Great example. GDPR compliance for 90% of companies will look the same. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel and no reason to spend a lot of tailor-made legal services. It's a bit like the shoemaker. If you go to a traditional law firm, it will measure your foot and then make a tailor-made shoe for you, which is great for your wedding day, but maybe not needed for your day-to-day business. We look at it much more like a Nike shoe production. We have different sizes and colors to fit what the customer needs, but it's standardized to an extent, and that makes it much easier to deliver and much faster as well.
So to Dave's point, actually, I think the whole template, I mean, if you can kind of template and create standard packages, I mean, that definitely works. I recently bought a shareholders agreement from a company called Co-Founding in Switzerland, basically. And yeah, they provide basically a standard shareholders agreement that's just kind of a fill in the blank, and it's fully compliant with Swiss regulations. So, I mean, I would love to see, I think, more of that, basically kind of like standardized, kind of out-the-box template. If you don't have unique situations, I think that kind of would be a great, I think, option for a lot of like startups just starting out and want to kind of get something on paper and really formalize it.
I think that's very true. In my case, I knew that there are these templates and I still wouldn't have trusted them. So I needed to be in a different situation. It's not about the GDPR anymore. It's about the convertible loan agreement that I also created with Christian, and I was really happy that I could send it back and forth. This would not have been able, in my view, I think, I wouldn't have been able to only use the template and be happy with it. So in that case, I needed a little more of your personal time, Christian, and I think somewhere in between is probably the truth for most of us.
So go ahead, Christian, sorry, man.
Yeah, definitely. With regards to the templates, one important thing to note is that the Swiss market is very small, so creating and selling these templates is hardly profitable versus the US, where you just have such a large market to sell into. In Switzerland, even with 3 languages, you have to translate it, so the costs of just creating templates is quite high. And for customers, what do we find? They really appreciate having this human element to it, knowing, yes, an expert looked at this, looked at my situation and told me, yes, this is the right document at the right time, and please also consider these tax issues and these HR issues and this topic that may pop up as a problem later on. So this added human element really provides a lot of customers with additional safety and a feeling of value.
Very cool. I would like to sum this up. We do need lawyers.
Definitely.
Some lawyers know that the services are changing, that the landscape is changing, and we have found one of them, actually the only one I know in the world. There must be others out there. I'm hopeful. But I know one, that's Christian. Christian, you're here. I'm really happy about that. We have established that we need lawyers, that this is an important thing. Maybe you don't mark the goals, but it's important anyway for our businesses in order to stay afloat in some matter. Anyway, this is it. And I would like to dive into the questions now. And the most important thing that I would like to tell our live audience is that this is your chance to ask your question. I have asked about 50 CEOs to tell me their questions. Only one came back, but the most important one is here. He has created a list of questions, and this is also your chance to ask your question right now. You don't need to be a CEO. We're happy that you're on the show. If you're a CEO, even better, but that doesn't make a difference right now. Thank you for being in the live audience. Thank you for asking your question, and just put it in the chat and we'll dive into it as soon as we get a question of yours. In the meantime, I think this is the moment where we can start diving into your questions.
All right, okay, cool.
Do you have them ready?
Yeah, I got a few questions. I mean, just kind of off the top of my head, I can kind of regurgitate some of them. So I think one of the first ones, Christian, I think is when a startup first kind of starts its life. It's usually a couple guys. They're in a room. They maybe have an idea. They maybe even have a customer, and maybe the customer is even part of the founding team, or maybe he's not. And so the question is first question is, at what point in the startup's life is it a good idea to incorporate? Basically, is it kind of like when you start to take revenue? Is it okay to not incorporate prior and just kind of ping pong back and forth with your product? Is it kind of when you start to have your first customer? So what's your view on when is the right time for a company basically to incorporate and confirm that, hey, mate, we have a business here. This is a validated market.
Sure. I think there's three factors to it. One is the stage of the idea validation. So how sure are you that with this business idea you're going to go with for the next couple of years? Next level then is risk tolerance. One big reason to incorporate is that you don't have personal liability anymore, and the corporation is solely liable for any obligations and damages you may cause. So once you start having customer contracts and deliver services where there may be a risk of incurring some sort of liability, or once you start to have larger expenses and commit to future expenses, there may be a good time to start incorporating to avoid having that personal liability. And the third part then is kind of the outside perception. As long as you're not incorporated, customers may not take you seriously, and at the latest when you want to get funding, that's for sure the stage where you want to have a formalized vessel through which you can launch your venture.
Interesting. So I think just kind of clarify one thing. So let's say the founding team is still, let's say, working on a product, just kind of brewing a product, just a bunch of guys developing something, not yet out to market. At that point, basically, there's potentially no need to incorporate yet, I would say. Maybe it's when you kind of go to market and start to kind of contract customers. Is that kind of just a general gauge? If you want to experiment with a product, that's okay at that point.
I would say so. Normally, unless you're in a high-risk industry, normally it's well worth it to spend a bit more time on idea validation, get customer feedback, maybe even start with a minimum viable product and get some feedback to see, is there even a market for this? And only once you really commit and say, yes, this idea is really something, you start to incorporate. And before that, you just take reasonable measures not to take any outsized liability risk.
All right. Sorry,
yeah,
Dave.
just one little thing that I would like to add. I have an accountability partner. We do an accountability partnership almost on a daily basis. And our little problem that we have in the validation stage, so we're getting to the minimum viable product, both of us, different businesses. But one of the problems that we run into is we want to do these validation interviews. And of course, at some point you find out that even during that phase, you already need to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of, the egg and the chicken that we have there.
Yeah, it's a perception play.
And I mean, it's a question of how much money you're willing to spend. Incorporating a business, it can be liquidated thereafter. It just costs money. That's the only issue. But even the capital that you deposit for the company, you will receive back once you liquidate the company.
Yeah, that's right. So I think let's talk a little bit of let's bridge into the capital. I think with kind of talking maybe about the structure of an entity that you would establish. So in Switzerland, I know you have 4 or 5 different entities that you can establish, but the predominant ones for startups usually end up being GmbH or AGs. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about which basically entity is better, either incorporating a GmbH over an AG, and in what cases would you incorporate a GmbH versus an AG?
And just a short one. This is an international show. Thank you, South Korea, for being with us. Thank you, Silicon Valley, for listening, for watching this because you have lost your son. So GmbH, that's probably like the LLC, or at least similar to the LLC, isn't it?
I think maybe it's an S corp. So I think the GmbH might be an S corp in the United States, and then a AG would be a C corp.
Okay, thank you.
Is that maybe Christian can confirm that? But
I mean, the both are limited liability companies in the sense that you personally, as a shareholder, don't have personal liability for the obligations of the company, and that's really the key feature of both of them that they have together. For the difference, it's if you think of a company as a structure where you need money and labor to get something done, in the GmbH, it's the structure where those that provide money and labor are usually the same people. Mm-hmm. So the shareholders or the stakeholders will be the ones that are also managing the company. Whereas in the AG, you usually have those that provide the money, the capital, and those that then execute it. There may be an overlap, but usually then you have external money coming in. That's really the overarching theme between the two. If you dive into some of the details, the AG, the big difference and big reason why a lot of startups don't choose the AG is simply that you need to put up 50,000 or you need to put up 100,000, 50,000 of which you have to pay in, whereas in GmbH you only have to pay in 20,000 as equity initially. So for companies and founders that are bootstrapping, often that is the reason why they opt for the GmbH. As soon as you want to get external funding, you necessarily need to switch into an AG. This then costs a bit of time and money. So we usually advise if you have sufficient funds to go directly for the AG. As mentioned before, if it were to fail immediately, you can still get your 50,000 back or your 100,000 or use it as well for the day-to-day operations.
I see. Okay, cool. So on the capital requirements, I remember you mentioned the AG. So the AG basically seems to be the more favorable option for those that are looking for potential venture backing in the future.
Yeah. It's the only one.
It's the only one.
To cut it short, it's the only one. I talked to the first 5 investors about my convertible loan agreement. 4 of them said, if you are an AG. So
yeah, exactly.
That's it. I mean, done deal. So right, Christian?
Absolutely. I mean, a convertible loan, you can structure it into a GmbH as well with the requirement to later switch into an AG, but you'll end up with an AG for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So when you convert, basically, you got to switch to the AG. When you can, okay. So the next one actually on the capital requirement question. So I know on the AG you're liable for 50K in cash, and then sorry, not liable. There has to be a 50K capital investment, and then you're liable for up to 100K. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
So you have to put in the 50,000 upfront.
Yeah.
And if the company goes bankrupt and there's outstanding liability, you're liable personally up to 50,000 more.
I see. Okay. So on the capital investment now, so the 50K that typically a startup has to input. Let's say you have 5 founders, and each founder, let's say, owns 20% of that startup, and you have to add 50K, let's say, as a capital investment. Does each founder is each founder liable for 10K of that 50K, his portion of shares within the AG? Or how is it?
Yes, that's right.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there any like opportunity for, let's say, founders or partners to contribute that amount in kind? Let's say via like services, equipment, intellectual property. Is there any kind of possibility to do that, Christian? Or does it have to be a capital cash investment?
No, you can contribute in kind. All you need is a confirmation by an auditor that says, yes, this car or this Bitcoin or whatever it may be you're bringing into the company are actually worth X amount.
But even labor services can actually be like, let's say you have a market salary, he's contributed this much. Could you do that as well?
It's assets.
Assets
so it's
only.
Intellectual property, cars,
your couch.
Bitcoin. Yeah. Couch.
Yeah, the couch. The couch for the lounge.
Oh,
good.
Man.
Anything else?
One more on the capital point. I know, and then Dave, you can kind of take it from that.
We have a question from the audience, you know.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Alan. We see you.
Okay. I mean, if you want to jump to that one.
No.
I mean,
just finish.
I just have one question on the shares. So I know you kind of establish a company, let's say off the bat. What is like a common way to, let's say, price shares? Like, do you issue 10,000 shares at a penny? Do you issue 1,000 shares at $1? Like, how exactly would you suggest, I think, splitting up the kind of the full amount of shares, and kind of how much do you start with, and what repercussions does that have in the future for the kind of the founders? What's like a good base to start from? Does that make sense, Christian?
Sure. Yeah. So the minimum split is like the nominal value, as it's called. It's 1 cent per share. Mm-hmm. So you'd have 10 million shares with a nominal capital of 100,000 at 1 cent each. Usually a small split is preferred because it makes it easier to calculate then in subsequent funding rounds the amount of shares, and you don't have to have rounding errors. So something between 1 and 10 cents is usually what's opted for.
Okay.
Cool. So we have gotten a second question, and I think it's time to dive into those. It's actually not Alan, it's Alain, who asked the first question. And Gustavo, could you help me with the first line, please? Because I don't see it on the display anymore. The question is, how would you suggest to create, okay, thank you for that. While growing as a company, how would you suggest to create a share and options plan to motivate the core team? Is there a simple way? Do you want the question again, Christian?
No, heard it loud and clear. Stock options and stock participation plans are more and more en vogue here in Switzerland as well. In the Silicon Valley, they're standard since I don't know how many years, but also in Europe, they're getting more and more traction. As a startup, you're usually poor in cash but rich in equity. So giving away some of that equity to attract talent is an attractive way to compete with, this very high salary standards we have here in Zurich and Switzerland in general. So that is definitely an attractive way of doing it. There's a couple of ways of doing it. You can go the phantom way or the virtual equity plan, where it's basically a bonus plan that simply says, well, in case of a later exit or in case of later dividend payments, the employee will get a certain amount of money that is equal to the amount he would have gotten if he had 3% of shares or 0.5% of shares. So it's just a virtual calculation basis where you virtually say, okay, what would happen if that person had 1% of shares? And then when you do the IPO with 1% of shares, you would have gotten 500,000. So the company pays out 500,000 as salary.
Wait, Christian, I'm still trying to follow that one. So hold on. So you're not giving away the equity. You're not giving away the 1%. You're just saying he's going to get 1% on condition that you have an exit.
Correct.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
you can structure it what the exit scenarios or the trigger points may be, but that's basically it. It's very low admin and straightforward, but it's not tax optimizable because any payment under such a plan will be treated as income on the employee side, so he has to pay full income tax. And also you as a company have to pay social security contributions on the full amount. So that if you have a larger exit, all of a sudden you make 1 million a year or 500,000 in a year, and then the tax man will take its cut, of course.
So there's no vesting plan on that, on the phantom stock plan?
Typically you add vesting as well.
Okay.
It's very similar with good leaver, bad leaver clauses. So if someone leaves the company as a good leaver, he's still eligible to receive cash in an exit event. But if he leaves at a bad leaver, for example, because he was committing fraud or for whatever reason he may have not quit the company well, he won't be eligible for anything, or only parts of it.
I see, but there'd be a cliff there as well, right? So in like Silicon Valley, when you issue like typically stock plans, you issue like standard packages like 4-year plan, 1-year cliff, and then it vests monthly basically. But I would imagine with the phantom as well, you'd have to have a cliff, right? There's no way.
Could we have a little explanation about the vested equity? Can you please explain that to us?
Christian, do you want me to take, or do you want me to do it? I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I mean,
no, but you can do it.
Disclaimer.
You brought it up.
Don't take my advice.
You brought it up.
Disclaimer.
That was Christian will correct you.
Disclaimer. So typically, like, let's say you issue like a stock option plan for like 40K worth of stock in a company. You typically won't get a single stock until you stay 1 year with the company. And after 1 year, you get 25% of that stock. So you would get, let's say, 10K.
10,000 in your example.
And then basically, after that cliff, they call it a cliff. After that 1 year cliff, you stayed your 1 year. Then every month after that, it vests monthly. So then you'd have like 36 months left for the rest of the 30K, and every month you'd get a sliver of that 36K monthly throughout the longevity of your employment.
So you would basically, as an employee, you would basically sign a contract that says you're going to get equity in the amount or nominal value that most probably is. I'm not sure about that, Christian, but you would get 40,000 all in all, and then you kind of have to start working for it. That's the basic idea behind it.
That's right, and you wouldn't get a single share until you're past the cliff.
Yeah, and after the cliff you get a 12th of your yearly quota. Basically.
Bingo.
Yeah. Okay, so you would have it in your contract, you get stock options, but you would have to work for them, and they only come in and actually become yours over time. That's what vested means.
Yeah, exactly.
Christian?
And we do it exactly the same way in Switzerland. So typically it's 4 years, 1 year cliff, and then either quarterly or monthly intervals after the cliff. What the big difference is between Europe and Switzerland and Silicon Valley? Founders tend to be much less generous. So a typical equity plan would be around 10%, whereas from stats I've seen, Silicon Valley, it goes easily up to 20-25%.
Which means that 25% of the overall company. Equity of the equity is reserved for employees.
Yes.
And you see that being more 10% of the overall value or equity.
In Switzerland, people often opt for 10%. Or something 5 to 15. Some are more generous, some less, but it's, from the stats I've seen, definitely lower than in the US. Maybe that will come up as we mature as a startup hub as well.
So back to the question that Alain asked, I would like to add this. How would you suggest to create a share and option plan? Like, are there a few tips that you can give him? And he also said, is there a simple way?
Sure. We offer it that's something we do on a regular basis. We offer it as a flat fee package, either as an employee stock option plan where you get actual shares of the company. There it's mainly, it's a bit more admin, but you can get, which is a Swiss specialty, you can get tax-free capital gains. So the increase of value between receiving your shares and then making the exit can be, not always, you have to observe some things, but can be tax-free capital gains, which means that that 500,000 that you would get under the phantom stock as income would actually be a tax-free windfall under an employee stock option plan. That's why some companies, especially high-growth companies, rather opt for these actual participation plans. And the simple way of doing it, we've created together with 2 other law firms in Switzerland and LEXR, which provide a cap table management solution standard. And we've automated that internally and deliver together with advice, of course, on tax and other structuring options, this for a flat fee.
Apart from becoming your client, are there a few other tips? If you want, just in order to keep it simple, as Alain asked for.
Sure. I mean, the simplest way is really of thinking of it as a bonus plan and doing it the phantom way. There are many fewer pitfalls. In a worst case, there's a lump sum payment you have to do. There's no minority shareholders that you may have to deal with if you set it up wrongly in the beginning. So going it the phantom way is definitely the simpler way and can be executed without much problem. I mean, there's especially think about what happens if things go wrong. If things go well and if you're in a good relationship, you don't need a stock agreement or a participation agreement with your employee. We also call agreements disagreements because you only need it when there's a disagreement. So think about the negative scenarios and what happens, for example, if an employee leaves the company after 2 years, or what happens if there's an early exit. If already after 2 years you have an exit, do the employees get the full amount of their package or only the vested amount? These kind of detailed questions can become really relevant down the line. So think about these different scenarios well, and then have a sensible solution for them in your plan.
I have 2 more things to ask you. One is that I have learned through working with you that there is also the matter of tax advisory. You're not a tax advisor, but there are lots of tax aspects involved in this whole thing, aren't there?
As soon as you go down with the actual equity route, there's a lot of tax questions. It's always the same tax questions. What makes it a bit difficult is that every canton has different policies on how to, especially around what is the value of a startup. So that's a key variable you need to know. What is the value of the startup at the point when you issue the equity versus at the exit point? At the exit point, of course, you have either an IPO and you have a price, or you have an investor, a buyer that pays a price, so you have a market value. But before you get to that market value, how do you define the price of a startup? And that has a major impact.
Is that not just, Christian, like your recent fundraising round? Let's say like you start up, there's 4 guys, 50K, or 100K is the value, or 50K is the value of your startup, let's say, based on the incorporation amount. And then you have a fundraising round, let's say of 2 million, valuing your company at 10. Is that not the value now of your company as it stands? And then the shares that the initial founders had at the beginning, at the incorporation date, that increase in value of their shares, like, does that have any tax liability?
So the tax lawyer's argument is that when you invest in a company, the valuation you take as a basis is a different one than if you were to buy shares from an existing shareholder. So there's a difference between investing in a company and contributing the capital to the company versus buying shares from an existing shareholder and paying the purchase price to that shareholder, so the money doesn't flow into the company. And the argument is, and I'm not sure whether all cantons, but at least Zurich accepts that line of argumentation. They say, okay, if there's an investment by an investor into the company, this valuation is not market value. Only once you have a third-party transaction, someone buying shares from an existing shareholder, you can have an actual market value.
So when
yeah.
Sorry, Chris, so when you so let's say you have 1,000 shares and then you issue 250 more shares to make it 1,250. Those 250 are now sold to, let's say, the investor base. That basically isn't considered market value.
Yes, that's right. That's not market value for tax purposes.
Okay,
at least.
So you don't report that as like capital gains income. The founders don't.
So there's 2 points in time when the issuance of stock option plan will be taxed. At the moment when the option is exercised, or when the share is given out to the employee, and there you pay the difference of the then current market value versus the exercise price. So as an example, if I get an option by the company to buy shares at 1 Swiss franc, and then after a couple of years I vest, and then I buy this share for 1 Swiss franc, but the actual market value is 10 Swiss francs, I generate taxable income on 9 Swiss francs, and the company has to pay social security on these 9 Swiss francs as well.
Okay.
So you have a first point of taxation there, and you want to be the valuation as low as possible for as long as possible.
Which is interesting, because if you have several rounds of financing, of course you need to kind of grow the value. You need to show proof that this company is becoming more valuable over time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the challenge is, like, I know you want to keep the valuation low, but the challenge is too, the faster your company grows, the more capital you need to intake. The more capital you take, the higher the value of your company. In turn, like, you're putting yourself, I know you want to keep the value low, as Christian said, but then you also don't want to impede growth of the startup. And so that's, I think, where the challenge lies then. It's like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Christian, but it seems like you're saying that, when, let's say you exercise your options at $1 in your example, and then the value goes up to 10, that $10 value, that value is made based on the last investment round, or is that value made by an exit from the startup?
So that value, so before you have an exit and lacking any third-party transaction, you will always base the valuation for tax purposes on a formula value. So the typical formula is 2 times earnings value and 1 times asset value. That's based on a circular by the Swiss tax authorities. But you can also go to talk to the cantonal tax authorities and discuss the valuation method. This valuation method is for normal companies that have a track record of generating revenue and profit, but for a startup without profit, this valuation is usually too low or way too low. So you can, and won't grow as steadily, or will be still very low at the point of exit. So what you can do is go to the tax authorities and say, hey, we're a startup. This normal standardized valuation formula doesn't apply to us. We want to have some sort of EBITDA multiple or other type of customary valuation method to define the tax value of our startup. And with that, you can improve as well the amount that, well, maybe taking a step back. With that helps to define, to know what is going to be my tax liability. And one thing why it's really important to have the formula value defined is, in the beginning, you're going to have a formula value, you don't have a market value. At the exit point, you're going to have a market
Why
value.
is that? Because we don't have any earnings and there are no assets.
Because in the beginning, you don't have any third-party transaction.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, it's just investors, but the investor valuation doesn't count. So you're just going to have the formal value, and then you're going to have market value at some stage. And then in principle, the difference is tax-free capital gains. But the tax authorities say, well, actually, only the difference between the formula value at exercise and the formula value at the exit is tax-free capital gains. the difference between the formula value at exit and the market value at exit is taxable income.
Okay, and I see.
So that's.
I can tell you from my brain and from looking at Bassil's face that this is a little too much for our boom show. Even though it's a startup special, and I'm really happy that we are getting nerdy here. I think that's something that you actually need to discuss with a lawyer. So what I have learned from working with you, Christian, one thing that I've learned from working with you is that when these things become a real thing, or a little before that, I need to make sure I have a few thousand on the side to discuss such matters with people like you and also with tax advisors.
So what we have done is also create a calculator to make it a bit easier and to be able to insert actual numbers. And then it spits out, okay, in scenario A, you would pay that much income tax and that much social security. In scenario B, these are the figures. And that makes it a bit more tangible. Because, as you say, with explaining with my hands, it's a bit hard.
Yeah.
And it's much better if you have actual figures and an Excel sheet in front of you with then visualization.
And even with the calculator, I mean, you still need to understand the most basic concepts of it, which of course to you is peanuts. But to somebody like me, I was a financial writer for the two biggest media houses in Switzerland, but even I, after more than 10 years of the job, I didn't know about these things anymore. Like, I really had to think my way into it. And in the end, and that's the second question that I wanted to ask you, and that I announced a few minutes ago. The second thing is, there's people who understand this, like professional investors, venture capitalists, people like you yourself, and then I might take enough time to start to understand it. But on the other side, sometimes, and especially when you do this with employees, there are people who have no clue about these things. And when you and I did the convertible loan agreement together, at some point I started making drawings in order to make other people understand it a little better. So that's another thing that we need to do. I mean, it's easy for you to kind of put the right words in place, but in the end, the two people who make that deal, and in many of the cases that we discussed, also because of the question that Alain asked, employees who have no clue about these things are involved, and that makes it even more tricky, I think.
For sure, and one thing we're continuously working and improving on is the way we explain these difficult topics in easy terms, and visualizations help tremendously. We're constantly writing and improving our guides, both for the executives that take the decisions, but also for the employees, so they understand, well, what does that actually mean, what I'm signing here? What does it mean being now a member of the stock option plan of company X?
Yeah, because
so that's very important.
Christian, you mentioned that agreements are also agreements for the case of disagreement. And in that situation, I mean, in order for me or for an employee, for instance, to understand what happens in the case of disagreement, they really need to think things through. And that's quite a bit of work.
Yeah,
definitely.
Good. Alain, I hope... Oh, yeah, great inputs. Thank you, says Alan. So that was probably a good answer for him. Took a little longer than we might have thought, but it was worth it. Christoph, thank you for being on the show again. Christoph has his own show, is a partner of this company who runs Poker TV, and he has his own show. Christoph, if your show has a name or has gotten a name in the meantime that I'm not aware of, please put it in the chat as well. Anyway, you have your show here on Poker.tv, and of course you're also an important reason for why this whole channel exists. Thank you for that. Your question is, how do you see China's advent in the tech industry from a legal point of view? First of all, Silicon Valley view. Did the Silicon Valley know that there is technology in China?
We've heard of it.
When did that start?
I mean, you see it all the time, right? I mean, there's...
Did you know 20 years ago?
20. I mean, I wasn't around 20 years ago, Dave. I don't know, but I mean, you see it all the time. There's like a funny, I don't know. There's a show called Silicon Valley. There's a funny show in Silicon Valley, an episode where they have a Chinese person in their incubator, and his plan is to go back to China and to basically copy all the Silicon Valley companies and just introduce it in China. And so, that's kind of been going on with quite a bit. Like, they have their own kind of Google copycat in Baidu. They have their own kind of WhatsApp copycat with WeChat. So, there's been a lot of movement, a lot of kind of, I'd say, you can say copycats, but also, you can also say there have been some innovation recently that's come out of China. Like we see TikTok now that's just come out of China by ByteDance, which is growing tremendously. So, I mean, China's definitely a growing force, and they're definitely exporting their products pretty quickly, and when we see that. But there's an interesting question from Christoph in terms of kind of the legal standpoint of kind of how China operates these kind of products. And that's definitely, it's a great question, I think. And for me, I'm also interested to understand, like, a company like ByteDance that produces TikTok, if they were going to enter a market, and now they're being kicked out of all these markets, but if they're going to enter a market like the United States or the UK, would they go in and establish entities in those markets and then operate in those markets? Or would they go in themselves, because it's a digital product, it can travel cross-border? Or do they just go in and just issue that product straight into that market? So that's, I think, like when I think of kind of how China is, let's say, exporting their products, from a legal standpoint, like, is there any kind of like legal limitation to that, or can they just pretty much just do that? Maybe that's kind of maybe Christian's views, or Dave, if you guys have any views on that, that would be kind of interesting to know.
I'm pretty sure that I have an idea about what Christoph meant, and I would like to bring that up afterwards. So, cool. Your question first.
Yeah, Christian, I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, can they basically, like a ByteDance, they're introducing TikTok into that, and unless if they want to go into a market, do they have to establish an entity in that market, or can they just go ahead and operate in that market and kind of export that product from China into that market, being a digital product, right? Not a physical product.
Sure. I mean, the current legal system was established with nation states in mind, where everyone has its rule of law, but the digital century completely upends that you can offer services from Switzerland into Zimbabwe without the problem, and the Zimbabwe government would have a very hard time to enforce their laws with an entity in Switzerland. So you have a lot of these gray areas where there is a law that you should comply with, but if you don't comply with it, there's simply very little you can do. When it comes to TikTok, of course, what you have is they need to go through either the Google App Store or the Apple App Store, which is, if you think about it, an amazing or a huge monopoly, but also a huge gateway for apps to enter into any market, and they're curated. So that's kind of a blocking point when you have an app. Apple or Google can actually limit you from entering another market, and if you and I think India did that, and other countries are considering it too, to actually block TikTok due to its data protection practices. So there are then means for the Indian government to say to Apple and Google, hey, take that app from the App Store. They would have a very hard time going directly against TikTok if they're not established.
Yeah, but I've seen Christian users basically, use VPNs maybe and try and kind of like bypass the App Store, limitations by country. And I think kind of like the more we move into the digital age, the more you're going to see that, and the less enforcement I think Apple and the Google Store are going to have, I would say. So, I mean, is there anything further that, let's say, from a legal standpoint, that kind of could prevent, because at the end the market decides, right? The free market decides. The governments and the corporations can do whatever they want, but if I'm a user in the UK and I really want to use TikTok, I'll just VPN my way through and get access to that app. But is there anything kind of further that they could do, or any kind of like, is the lines between legality becoming more and more faded, is what I'm trying to say, to prevent digital products cross-border?
So if you have a bad actor, if you're a bad actor, there's many ways of entering a market illegally without caring for legislation too much. Of course, if you reach the levels of TikTok and have that kind of attention, there's also ways. I think if you're just blocked from the local app store, even though some people can access it through a VPN, you'll be effectively driven out of a market. I think in general, it probably law enforcement has probably improved in the digital age. When I think back of the heydays of the 90s and 2000s, where the internet was really this freedom of speech, anyone can be whatever they want to be. It's gotten more and more regulated. Less so maybe in Europe and the US, but in countries like China and Iran and others, they have so heavily regulated the internet that it's become really difficult for people to have free speech or any of these advantages. And actually it flipped almost to the contrary, where the internet has now become a tool of mass surveillance for these authoritarian regimes to infringe upon the basic freedoms of people. Yeah.
Good. I jokingly said to all of you who are involved here in the production setting that at the end it will be my most important job of this show to cut it and say this is over. And we're almost at the point, we have 4 more minutes. I would like to twist Christoph's words and just ask them in a whole different, ask that question in a whole different way. And that way is, should we worry from a legal standpoint, should we worry about Chinese technology?
So one important aspect to note is, and we work with Chinese clients that come into Switzerland as well, their perception of the rule of law is very different. As in China, you have a country where the rule of law, both for the foreign companies coming in, is basically non-existent. So IP theft is a big topic, but this is also an issue for local Chinese companies, interestingly. But also their approach to regulation is much more lax, and they have an incredible entrepreneurial drive that is. They can do basically anything if they have the right relationships in the local government, and that drives an incredible technology boom currently in China.
Should we be worrying?
Should we be worrying about it? Technology can always go both sides. I think that the private companies in China, there will be more. They're already shifting or have shifted a long way from copying IP to generating IP, and being from medicine to robotics to AI to blockchain. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of life-changing innovation coming out of China. Should we worry what governments can do with the technology or bad actors? Definitely, there's always bad things that technology can do. But I think it's less of a legal issue than society as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add a little bit to that. I think, you're seeing recently from a manufacturing standpoint, a lot of investment and movement is happening out of China over the past couple months into India specifically. So you saw like Google now pledging $10 billion to invest into India. We're seeing Foxconn, which is the main manufacturer of the iPhone, moving plants from China to India. So we're seeing kind of maybe a little bit of a shift, and we see how Facebook invest in one of the biggest, I'd say, marketplace platforms in India. So we're seeing a shift almost from China to India. So there's kind of that bit of a shift, and that's predominantly, I think, happening because kind of the over-dependence of China as a manufacturing powerhouse, and also because of kind of the amount of kind of data that we're giving China. So from that standpoint, China maybe is starting to shift a little bit in terms of the way they're thinking of technology. One area where I think there is a little bit of worrisome, and I think they have a significant advantage over, I'd say, other kind of countries which are also working with the same kind of technologies in the field of machine learning and AI. No doubt China, based, in let's say in the United States or in Western worlds, there's limitations on the type of data you can collect, how fast you can regurgitate that data, how you can use that data for your own profits. But in China, there's, I'd say, less of a data protection mechanism. So there's pace in terms of collecting data, churning data, kind of the amount of data also that they can collect, and the access to data that they can collect. That puts them at a competitive advantage over, I would say, other AI and machine learning let's say, companies in Western worlds.
Bassil, we should do this in another
Sorry.
show. Actually,
We're
I have
closing
to cut you short. Thank you very much for that input as well. Christian, as you know, I had a question from Tobias Stahl, as we say in Switzerland, CEO of Smart Energy Link, and he said, can I actually patent my software codes, my algorithms?
Good question.
How do I do that?
That's that's a bit of an evergreen with patent attorneys, and it's a huge debate whether first software should be patentable. When you think about the patent as it gives you the monopoly to use a invention during
Christian,
a
I
certain
already
amount
feel
of-
that this question is going on a little longer. Can we offer
I'll
Toby
keep
that
it short.
you?
Okay.
No, can we offer to
Go.
Toby that I will jump on a call with you and him?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Maybe I just.
If anybody
wrap it up
else
in
would
one
like to be on
sentence.
the call, find me. Dave Hertig is my name on LinkedIn. Write to me. We will have a call with Christian about this topic because this is the end of it. Thank you very much for coming to the studio. Bassil,
Dave.
thank you very much,
Thanks,
Christian,
Thanks
for
so
joining
much,
us from
guys.
Spain. This is it. Thank you to the audience. Thank you for your questions. Have a great time until we meet again. That was the Boom Show. Goodbye.